I'd like to introduce the speakers for this morning's two-part session, The Law and Economics of Framework Agreements, Part 1, Forming a Master Agreement. The learning objectives for this session are: 1, deepen understanding of the legal and economic issues surrounding framework agreements, and 2, learn best practices for forming a master agreement, including the structural, managerial, and economic issues inherent therein. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Keith McCook, General Counsel for the Procurement Division in the state of South Carolina, Christopher Yukins, the Lynn David Research Professor, George Washington University, and joining us virtually, John Luigi Albano, Head of Division Consip in Italy. Please join us.
Good morning. So I've been asked to kind of start this off just setting a little bit of a framework, a background, no pun intended on the framework. Why are we here? Why is this something of interest? Why do we have an economist here to speak to us? Which is, Gianluigi is an economist. Years ago, we did, when I was very early on with the Division of Procurement Services in South Carolina, we had a contract come along, and it was a task order contract. It wasn't, which is one variation of an indefinite delivery contract, or which is called a framework agreement in the European setting, which I actually prefer as a name. It's more indicative. And I was very unhappy with it, right? I think, less than 5 years. And I felt like it circumvented all these different policies and procedures and rules that I had just spent the last few years learning and advocating for in bid protests. And so I went to the client and said, I brought my concerns up, and I was told, well, you got 2 days to fix it. So I worked up the first set of rules for secondary competition. I was really dissatisfied with it, but I had inserted myself. Nobody had really asked me to get involved. So I had, as my, surprise, the people in the audience who know me. But that was kind of the last time. Well, they've reused that multiple times, but they've only used it for task orders, and no real change has ever been made to the IDIQ approach for what you might call commercial items, particularly supplies. And the years rolled by, and I just kind of kept my mouth shut and did what I was told to do. And then I watched as the state's approach to indefinite delivery for IT professional services was just horrible. And it was awful. The misuse of the contract was off the charts. We had one example where we spent a sum of money I just won't even say publicly through one task order, which was never intended. And we found ourselves putting a procurement officer at the entry level in charge of monitoring it, when there's enormous pressure to use these things in ways that individual wasn't really in a position to handle or manage or say no. And so the client finally came to me and said, help, we need you to fix it, and we don't have much time to do it. And I thought, this is my chance. And I said, well, okay, you got it. And I started reading and started doing research, and it was some very long weeks for several months. And one of the things I read was a whole series of articles from 2008, because there's an entire public contract law journal devoted to IDIQs. And I went down the rabbit hole only to find that there has been an enormous amount of discussion at the federal level about all the problems, pros, cons, challenges in IDIQs, and everything from commodities to professional services and the whole gambit. And what I was learning was there are lots of problems, and we are certainly not unique to it. There were just audit reports and advisory groups that were trying to identify what were best practices and what needed to be done right, but I wasn't finding a solution. And then Chris connected me, or told me about a book that was written by this Italian guy, and I thought, really? Okay, and he's an economist, he's not a lawyer. Now, his co-author is a lawyer in the European setting, and Caroline, is it Wilson? Nicholas, thank you. Caroline Nicholas. And I opened the book and I read the first chapter, and I thought, this is it. This guy's laid it all out. So I did some research on him and found a YouTube video where he had spoken at a European event. And I couldn't turn it off. It was just a magical presentation. It was so easy to follow. He laid it all out. So I read the whole book, and it's not a thin book, and it's tabbed and highlighted and cross-referenced. And I got to the end of it, and by the time I'd gotten to the end of it, I had written a complete set of rules for our specific need, which was, how do we do this right? How do we do it really fast? How do we accommodate all the underlying policies and procedures, but not the law necessarily, on that underlie procurement, make it really fast and efficient and constrained. And we are about to put it out, to set sail and put the solicitation out once we negotiate with one final internal customer. And this presentation kind of grew out of that because I felt like the message of indefinite delivery contracts and the problems and the solutions, right? The pros and cons needed to be heard. And so I wanted it to really get some attention. So Chris here has written, I think, multiple law review articles about it and spoken about it. Obviously, Gianluigi wrote the book about it. And before I got up here a week or two ago, I called the people at the senior manager and the procurement services division, and I said, you know, we've done this in a way that y'all know I don't agree with for all these years. So why did you finally come to me and say, make it work, McCook, do your thing, right, and get it done quick? And they said, well, the way we're working it, we're not getting speed to market. We're getting bogged down, but we're not getting speed to market. There's no accountability in the way we've been doing it. There's no transparency in the way we're doing it. It's being abused, and we don't know how to fix it. We don't know how to get to standard terms with all the vendors because what we're having is differing terms on just every task order. There's no control over it. And we have no price competition for the actual work on each individual order. And of course, IT professional services, you cannot rely on unit pricing like you can on asphalt, right? I can get a unit price on asphalt and by the mile, or pencils. But when you're doing hourly rates where they can just make up the number of hours, my state doesn't have the framework, certainly in the law, or the people to actually manage that type of contract. And it's the way it was being administered was not fair and equitable to all the vendors. It was kind of a hunting license. And I thought, well, let's share the news. So this morning's presentation is really to introduce the topic, give you an opportunity to hear from two world-class experts, give you some insight into the issues, make you think about it, and then decide what you want to do. Chris, any opening thoughts before we turn it over to Gianluigi?
I'm just really delighted that Gianluigi could join us. Gianluigi is Cambridge trained, London School of Economics trained economist. He is as he'll be describing to you, he's a senior manager at Consip, which is the Italian centralized purchasing agency, CONSIP, Consip in Rome. It's inside their Department of the Treasury, and it serves serves governments across Italy. So he has accumulated an enormous amount of information, of experience in the use of IDIQ contracts, what they call framework agreements. His co-author, Caroline Nicholas, who wrote the book that Keith was referring to, Caroline was the woman who really pushed through the UN Model Procurement Law. And the UN Model Procurement Law, I was part of the US delegation for that. The UN Model Procurement Law really helped set up international thinking about the use of IDIQ contracts, for the use of framework agreements. So he was in their book, published by Cambridge University Press, is a wonderful introduction to a lot of the issues that we'll be talking about today. I actually saw, on a personal note, I last saw Gianluigi in Rome in September. My wife and I were doing a Catholic pilgrimage the last 100 kilometers from Viterbo down to Rome. I fell down on the way. So I learned you can actually do a pilgrimage by taxi, and it's not so bad.